Hi guys, Luke from Carbide 3D here. Something I've been asked to do many a time is to do an install video of the HDZ, so that's what I'm going to do. I am going to cheat slightly because I work for Carbide 3D. I have multiple Z carriages lying around and I can walk you through what we're going to take off and what we're going to put back on. Anyway, with that said, this process is uniform across the range. You can install a HDZ on a standard 3, an XL or an XXL. I'm doing it on my XL here. And the very first thing I want you to do is disconnect your power and disconnect your USB. Make sure they're off and not connected to anything. You are, loosely speaking, playing with the electrics here, and we don't want you to short or screw anything up from that side. Now, with that said, the next thing I usually do is take the router bit out of the router or spindle. If you have a bit in there, you can cut yourself. I know, I have done it. Please just take it out. Now, moving ahead. We've got our Z carriage here, and mine's actually not got its mount on because I've already taken it off. Needless to say, we're going to go through the steps here. The very first thing I want you to do is take off your belt and only do it on one side. I favour the right hand side, so I'm going to take my belt off, just undo the screws and feed out the belt from the bracket, and you can put it to one side. Secondly, we're going to disconnect the motors. So you might have to take off a couple of the clips from the drag chain to do so, but just disconnect the motors. You've got the X and Z motor there, and we want to take those off. There we are. And then we're going to disconnect or remove our limit switches. So we start off with Z. So here we've got our Z switch. It's behind this metal plate. Wrong Allen key. Right Allen key. I should actually mention, to do this, you don't need any specialist tools. You'll need your standard Shapeoko toolkit and an 8 and 10mm spanner. I also have a pair of wire cutters to hand, as well as a pair of pliers, just in case I need them. All the hardware is provided with the HDZ. There's a couple of bits you will take off your Z-axes, but you won't need to buy anything else for this. I like to keep the screws to hand because having all the old screws is pretty useful. You can't get enough M5 screws over the pond. So we've just removed the front plate, or we're removing the front plate now, and that's got the Z limit switch on it. So we've got the plate off, and I'm just going to grab a Allen key and remove the actual screw and nut from the plate. We don't need the plate after this, so put that to one side. So we're going to put the plate out the way, and I'm going to put the screw and nut together just here. Next we're going to do the X limit switch, and it's very similar. It's on the back with two M5 stays. A slightly larger Allen key. And it's got two large M5 screws going through it, two 20 or 25mm stays, like that. Again, I'm just going to put these to one side because it's always handy to keep them with easy access. And there we are. So we've done that. We're now going to remove the drag chain bracket. So this is affixed to the standoffs next to the Z motor, and we're just going to remove the standoffs and again those M5 screws and put them up to one side. So now the Z-axis should be loose on the extrusion, and you could technically move it around because I've got my drag chains there. The only thing that now connects it is these bottom V wheels. So to remove those, you're going to use your Allen key, and I just find it actually easier to completely remove the screw. We're not going to use these V wheels again. The HDZ ships 4 replacement V wheels for your peace of mind. So you don't actually need to keep these. Although if they're in good condition, no harm why you couldn't use them again. We're taking those off. We've lost one of the eccentric nuts. I should mention all the HDZs ship with HD eccentric nuts, which are a heavier duty version of the eccentric nut, which we've had for a while now. We can now lift off the axes. So here's a stock axes. Obviously we haven't got our spindle mount on it. The next thing you're going to do is harvest a few parts from it. First off, you're going to want to remove the springs from the top, and that will allow you to move the carriage up and down easily. You can then remove the belt. And then once you've removed the belt, you'll be able to slide the carriage apart. From here you can remove the spindle mount, taking the M5 screws out the back. I'm going to put this to one side. Now here's the stock axes with all the parts still on it. The parts you're going to want to harvest is going to be your Z-axis motor, so the top one. Remove the M5 screws on the rear. You're going to remove your X-axis motor. You don't need to worry about keeping the screws handy for this one. And then we're going to keep and take off these M8 bolts. On the M8 bolts you've got a nut, you've got 2 flanged bearings per bolt, and then you've got a small spacer. I want you to keep these to hand because you are going to put them on the HDZ. Now I'm going to show you one in true Blue Peter fashion. I'm sure that reference will be lost on the Americans. Here's one I did earlier. So as you can see, I've taken all the parts off. I've left the motor stays for X on there. I've completely removed Z. So I've now got a HDZ, which I prepared earlier as well. So this is version 3.3 of the HDZ. As you can see, it's subtly different from previous versions, and following on the Kaizen philosophy that I've always had, we do subtly improve it. So really this is very similar to the standard HDZ, just the Z-axis motor is slightly lower, and we've removed a couple of screw holes which no one was using. It still supports the standard spindle mount, easy tram, and also 80mm spindle mounts. So what have I fitted? And we're going to turn it around for this. First off, first thing you're going to want to fit is the 2 V wheels, which we include with 25mm screws M5 in these top holes. So the way they fit, you've got V wheel, sorry, you've got shim, V wheel, nut or bolt. We've then got our M8 bolts. So included with each HDZ is 2 M8 bolts. You're going to put the M8 bolt, you're then going to put a washer which is included, you're then going to put on the flanged bearings and spacer. So I'm just going to hold it there, you can see. So here you go. You've got M8 bolt, washer, flanged bearing, spacer. And you'll see those all go in a line. We then fit the X-axis motor. Included in the kit are 4 motor standoffs which thread into the 4 holes, and then the X motor just goes on top with 4 M5 screws which are included. On the right hand side I put these as temporary to show you where they go. On the right hand side we've got our X-axis limit switches. These are X-axis limit switch holders, so the M5 bolts go through 2 holes there. And just slightly further up, again on the right hand side, we have 2 M5 screws. and these are for your drag chain support. Turning it around and looking at the Z-axis motor, one thing you will need to do is remove the gear shaft, or sorry, the gear from your Z-axis. And to do so, I'll briefly explain it using this one. On here, you will have two small grub screws. You want to undo each grub screw once it's off the unit, and either using a screwdriver or claw hammer, you want to lever this off. After this, you will no longer need this little gear, and it can be put to one side. When you're fitting the Z-axis motor to the Z-axis, first fit the coupling and then slide the motor in the shaft. Then put the screws in and do up the shaft as the last thing you do. As a quick tip, as I said, you get the HD eccentric nuts for the HDZ included here. It's handy if you can fit the HD eccentric nuts in the holes beforehand. They are quite fiddly, but they will stay in place. Now, the exciting bit, we're going to refit the HDZ to the axes, and because we fitted all the hardware already, we can just drop it in place straight away, and that way we don't have to hold it. It's quite heavy, and we can see it rolls nicely. We're going to take it off, so put it on as we took it off, just reverse it. First thing we're going to do is put on two new V-wheels. Included in the package, as I said, are new M5 screws. You're going to have M5 screw, V-wheel, shim. And what I like to do is hold it so I've got the screw all the way out, just going through the shim. And what I'm going to do is gingerly slide that onto the back and push the screw through, tilting the HDZ backwards a fraction, and then I can get grip on the HD eccentric nut. And I just do it finger tight to begin with. Same technique on both sides. Oh, better technique than that, hopefully. Thought he caught. Into the HD eccentric nuts. I'm just using Allen key, and what you're going to do initially is just do it so it's a little bit, I suppose finger tight's the best way of explaining it. However, you can't tighten this with your finger easily, so it's just kind of on there but not super tight, because you're going to want to be able to adjust the HD eccentric nuts, and it's a slightly different process to how you tighten them normally, because you're going to actually tighten them using the Allen key rather than a nut. So you need a 10mm spanner for this part, and it's quite hard to see, I can certainly appreciate that. What you're going to do is put the 10mm spanner on the HD eccentric nut, and you're just going to gently turn it half a turn at a time, gently tightening it up. And when you feel it start to bite, you're going to put your finger on the V-wheel and gently move the carriage along, applying pressure to the V-wheel finger. And if you can feel it moving still, it's probably just about right. If you can't feel it moving, it's too loose. At the point you're happy, you're going to hold the spanner in place and then tighten it up from the rear. And we're going to do the same on both sides, left and right. So a couple of movements, you can feel it where it starts to bite. And now we should see very little wiggle in our HDZ. We've now got this on, so I can move it around. I'm quite comfortable about that. The next stage is going to be to reattach the drag chain. This contains all our wires, so it makes sense to do this next. Remember those two M5 screws? Now, unlike the standard carriage, you don't need to take the screws all the way out or all the way off. You can just install them loosely, and you can slot the Z-axis, sorry, the drag chain bracket on there, and just gradually do up those screws. And that's really nice and easy. The next thing we're going to do is the X-axis limit switch. And if you recall, we had these two M5 screws, approximately 35mm long, and standoffs. And what we're going to do is just pop those onto the X-axis switch bracket, just as you took it off. Hopefully it should be nice and easy for you. It's a little bit fiddly because you're trying to hold the brackets there at the same time, but it's not too difficult if you can ask your lovely wife, husband, etc. to give you a hand. Kids have got small hands, which are probably great for this kind of thing, I'd imagine. You can then pop that on. And now we have our X-axis switch on. Excellent. So you can just press in there. Following that fashion, we're going to look at the Z-axis, and this is slightly different because in previous versions of the HDZ it came up and we had proximity switches, or we had a small little bracket you can mount it to. We've gone one step further with version 3.3, and this particular version, what you're going to do is put the limit switch into the little hole and see that align, and take that, I think it's an M3 or M2.5 screw we took off it earlier, and slide them in there, and then you're just going to do them up. A little bit fiddly because he's such a small screw, but do him up, and there he is, he's in. And now what you're going to have is your Z-axis limit switch there, and you can see he's nicely in place, and he should be aligned with the motor there. We've done the switches, now we're going to do the motors. The important thing is to get them the right way round, so make sure you do Z and X correctly, otherwise you're going to have all sorts of problems. So we do that, and next, and you might need to put on your little drag chain brackets, if you, it's not drag chain brackets, the little fasteners if you took them off like I have. Now at this point we're in a good position, we've got HDZ on, the electrics are pretty much done, but the next thing is spindle. Now if you're using the 18mm spindle mount, you've got 4 M6 holes which you use. If you're using the standard spindle mount, here's one I have prepared earlier, you take your standard M5 screws out of the stock Z plate, you then fit them into the recessed holes in the back of Easy Tram, and then we're going to fit it to the front. There's 4 M5 screws, we've got 2 in the top and 2 at the bottom. I find doing the top ones first is slightly easier, and what I'd like to do is just put them on with the eccentric spacers. I do say eccentric spacers, so included in the pack there are some eccentric spacers. These are M5, but they are not threaded, so your screws will slip straight through. And these are for adjusting tram left and right on your axes. So we'll just slide that on, and we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. There we are. So we've got them. And we're just going to do this finger tight. We don't need it to be super tight yet because we're going to have to tram it at some point. What I like to do personally is there's a couple of little dimples. I just align these to the top so you know they're in the correct place. There's one. You know it's going to be kind of level at that point and kind of trammed. Obviously it needs a bit of tightening up. After this we take the 2 M5 screws, which are also included in your package, HDZ package, and put them in the lower holes. These just secure the spindle mount and make sure the Easy Tram is nice and secure when it's all done up. There they are. In they go. We can then take our router and or spindle and slide it into the holes and tighten these up. you go. Now, if you were to tram use easy tram as it's meant to be used, it's really easy. What you do is just loosen off bottom screws, only about half a turn. Then take 10mm spanner and or Allen key, and you loosen the screw at the top by a little bit, about a quarter of a turn, top and bottom, or left and right. And at this point, you use a spanner to adjust the eccentric nut, moving up or down, and that will move either side up or down. When you're ready and when you're happy you've trammed it, you tighten the Allen key, or sorry, the screw holding the nut. Now, I'm not going to walk you through the tramming process. There are a bunch of videos on that, and it's not something I'm going to cover in this video. We're then going to tidy up our work area. We're going to make sure nothing's in the way. We've got clear movement, at which point we're happy. We can reassemble and put the belt on. Again, I'm not going to show you how to put a belt on, hopefully because you've taken it off, you know how to put it back on. Plus I can't show you because it's behind the machine, but just make sure it loops over the X pulley on the motor and it goes correctly. So if I grab my old Xaxis and just walk you through it. So you're going to be going in, the belt will go up, it will then go up and over the pulley, not over the whole assembly, just over the pulley, back down, up and around, and come out that side. Assuming you've done that correctly, your axes should be back on, and for reference you can just look at either of your Y plates. They use the same configuration of belt. You've then got this on. You'll need to tighten your belts, and then your machine is pretty much good to go. Next, you're going to turn it on and plug it in and go straight to carbide motion, and do not home it. Please do not home it. It will move all the wrong way. What you need to do is go to connect to the cutter or the Shapeoko and go to settings. When you're in settings, there is an option to send configuration data to your machine. Make sure you're using carbide motion 4.17 onwards. And assuming you've done that, you will be able to click a box which says enable HDZ. Enable HDZ, click that box and then select your machine and send config data. That will change all the gerbil settings to make this work straight away in carbide motion. From there, to be honest, the next thing I'll do is just test the limit switches, because you have had these off, and just check motion. So make sure X, Y, Z all move the correct way. The limit switches, if you're in carbide motion in settings, I believe, there is actually an area where you can trigger them and see they've been triggered. And assuming that's all done, you should be in a position to start cutting, working machine. Make sure you run a homing cycle, run through homing, and just make sure everything feels it should be before you start a job. Make sure everything's tight and you're all comfortable with it. Assuming you've done all that, you're good to go. But if you do have any questions or any issues, email support@carbide3d.com and we're here to help. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope that has been useful, and we'll have you up and running very soon. Cheers guys.